So, the show has already been bordering on duplicitous for its lack of books. And now it's not even giving us Boba Fett. Is this title even accurate anymore? Yeah, it's the latest episode of The Mandalorian, also known as the latest episode of the book of Boba Fett, supposedly. Now, I know what this review is going to turn into. And I'm sorry. But the simple fact is that while this may have been a decent episode of The Mandalorian, speaking as someone who hasn't had the motivation or felt the impetus to actually finish the second season of The Mandalorian, not in a, oh God, don't want to touch that again way, but just in a, I don't feel that it's that pressing for me to get caught up on this kind of way. What this did for me was remind me of all the reasons why I have trouble finishing the Mandalorian seasons that are out there. So yeah. And to be fair, I've seen some evidence online with reactions that this is a good Mandalorian story and that people who like that show might like this. I was very bored. It doesn't help that this is, I think, the longest episode of the show so far. That didn't help for me, at least. And look, it's not impossible to do these kinds of divergent jump to a different character, jump to a different location, jump to a different situation kind of episodes. It is possible to make it work. Hell, I seem to be the only one on the planet who liked that one episode from Stranger Things Season 2 that everyone else hated, where we jump over to see what Eleven was doing with all these other young people who had powers. I thought that was one of the highlights of that season. Granted, that's also partly because I didn't think that season was very good, so highlight is relative. But, it can work. But for me, I was very bored. And it actually brought me to a bit of a realization about why I have trouble getting through The Mandalorian. Because The Mandalorian is not devoid of things that I find interesting or enjoyable. The thing is that the Mandalorian himself is not among them. He is functional. He is not deeply interesting. He's not a particularly engaging character. I'm not entirely sure if he's meant to be. Or at least the fact that he isn't actually a death blow to that show. It does lower my interest in it, as I've said. But everything else going on around him, other characters, the situations are far more interesting, and him being just stoically badass through it works well enough when the story doesn't call on him to pull the weight of personality. Other characters are doing that. So that works pretty well. And while we get the mechanic back in this, and I do like her well enough, this is a much bigger focus on not only the Mandalorian himself, but the background and history and lore of the Mandalorians as a whole. And you know what? I've said on the record before, I like plot more than I like lore. I'm actually getting to the point where lore, and particularly anything that feels like a lore dump, or like the lore is starting to take control of the plot, irritates me. It hasn't gotten to the point yet where it irritates me on the scale of Chosen One and Prophecy narratives. However, those two do tend to overlap because things heavy in lore tend to have a lot of prophecies, as is evidenced in the fact that with the frickin' Darksaber, we have to hear about it's so far old, it is said to do this, and if this happens, then this will happen, and this is prophesied, and this happened in the past. I'm like, I don't care. I know other people do, and you're not wrong to care. These things appeal to you. That is great. Lore dumps bore the crap out of me. And I can enjoy exposition. Frequently, I love well done exposition, but lore dumps, that is a particular type of expedition that I have no interest in. And the type of character that not only the Mandalorian himself, but the other Mandalorians around him tends to be is a character archetype that bores me, which is people driven by code instead of by desire. And like, especially when they are so rigidly sticking to their code that basically any conversation about their own wants or desires or whatever becomes moot because no, this is the way. That just supersedes all character. This is the way, so this is what they do. Oddly enough, the fact that I have not caught up on The Mandalorian did not preclude my being able to follow this. Because the Darksaber as a thing that exists was introduced at the end of the first season, or at least appeared. It wasn't really used in any meaningful way. But from there, it was not hard for me to extrapolate. Oh, Mando ended up with that. Okay, cool. He says that he dropped off Grogu. Cool. That covers that. Works well enough. He doesn't seem to have his ship anymore. Okay, fine. Like, all this is stuff that makes general sense. There's an allusion to, like, he took his helmet off in front of somebody. Apparently that's a huge no-no. And again, just, it makes... And like, it doesn't help that stuff is brought up at the same time that the forger, who, makes the weapons and the armor and whatnot, that she brings up, Jedi training, they have to cut off all attachments, which was one of the stupidest rules and background details and codes and lore aspects that George Lucas ever introduced to the Jedi. That's really dumb. It's very stupid. And like, I understand why he did it, especially because the fall of Anakin in specific is linked to the fact that he is tied up so much in his care for other people that he does horrible things thinking it will help him save them. So like, I get why he wanted to basically make the rules the opposite of what Anakin's inclination to do was, but if he's already going to do terrible things that are just bad in and of themselves, like kill children, then having it be at odds with the rules is unnecessary. It's already a terrible thing. But now I'm going off on that tangent. It kind of shows you how much, like, I really don't have to say about this episode. About the only thing I got much enjoyment out of, aside from like a few little bits here and there from the mechanic, like I like the idea that she used to date a Jawa. They're very furry. I kind of like that. It was, you know what? I have a slightly better appreciation for the design on those fighters from episode 1, the Naboo fighters. Now that the frickin' stupid ass yellow paint has been stripped off it. Looks much cooler now. Looks much more Star Wars now. Like that paint job, it was so weird. Like, honestly, just even seeing paint on a ship, like seeing any of them in these bright colors, like, that's weird, because the ships in Star Wars were always very utilitarian, even the Empire stuff. So it wasn't even just a matter of, the scrappy rebellion throwing together whatever they could get. Like, the Star Destroyers were huge, but also utilitarian, cobbled together and not built around looking good at all. And like, an Empire would have a reason to want their war machines to look good. That's part of how you flex your power. They still didn't bother. So, and like, I'm taking the one thing that not the one, but one of the things that I did like, and now I'm tangenting off into a whole other conversation, because what else is there to say about this? So, like, he's gonna show up, and like, I guess, again, I suppose, for the sake of people who did watch The Mandalorian, which, to be fair, is probably the majority of the people watching the Book of Boba Fett, I suspect I'm in a very small minority of people who have not caught up on The Mandalorian, but are also watching this and sticking with it. So, like, for anybody else who isn't me, most viewers, this was honestly probably necessary, because the putting him on Tatooine and being willing to take up a job on behalf of Boba Fett is probably too big a leap from wherever he was left at the end of season 2 to just go into. And you've got to cover, how did he end up back on Tatooine? How is he in a situation where he would be taking this job? You know, what happened to his connections with the other Mandalorians? Like, it makes sense that you'd have to cover all this. But for me, as someone who doesn't know what situation he was in at the end of The Mandalorian, this is 50 minutes of I don't care. It's lacking everything that I have found engaging about the Book of Boba Fett, the underworld situation, the politics, the complicated ins and outs of alliances and who can we trust. It's none of it's here. Not a single bit. And again, like the oversimplified code of honor of the Mandalorians, in contrast to the deliciously messy web of alliances that we've been seeing in this underworld that Boba Fett is trying to establish himself in, there's no comparison. One is boring, the other is really interesting, and they don't mesh. How much you want to bet this is the best loved episode of the show? I just crapped all over it. That would just be my luck, wouldn't it? That would just be Village of the Angels all over again. Or again, me being the one human being on the planet who actually defends that episode of Stranger Things Season 2. I don't mean to be a contrarian. I honestly don't. And maybe I'm not. Maybe I am on board. But like, my gut instinct tells me I'm gonna be the only one complaining. And there is going to be a crap ton of people yelling at me in the comments, and I don't know, people calling me a fake fan because I didn't catch up on The Mandalorian, or yeah, just going to get a bunch of dislike votes or whatever. That's just my gut instinct. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. I like to be wrong. Actually, given that I'm kind of a cynical person, I'd prefer to be wrong more often than not. But anyways, Book of Boba Fett, supposedly. What'd you think of this episode? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Like, share, subscribe. Patreon. That's how the bills get paid around here. Every little bit helps, but don't worry too much about it. Links in the description for that, as well as other things. If you want to check out the other stuff that I do, like Twitch and TikTok and Instagram and Twitter, etc., etc. But no big pressure. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so just come on back next time you need a break. Thanks for sticking around into the credits. None of this would have been possible without my Patreon supporters in particular. I want to thank Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Robin Moore, Shayla Gourlay, and Bookworm. Thanks for keeping this going. And to everybody,